Cops respond to 4-year-old's 911 call and find something terrifying in his home. When a 4-year-old dialed 911, the dispatcher thought it was a prank, but when officers arrived at the scene, what they found inside the house left even seasoned police speechless. This story of bravery, a shocking discovery, and an act of selflessness will remind you that even in the darkest moments, hope can shine through. It was a Friday evening in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Ohio, the kind of place where the streets felt safe, where neighbors waved hello, and where nothing out of the ordinary ever seemed to happen. For 4-year-old Ethan, though, this particular Friday was extraordinary. His excitement had been building all week because tonight was his big sleepover at his grandparents' house. Ethan loved visiting them. Their home, with its warm, cozy furniture and the faint smell of cinnamon and lavender, felt like a magical escape from the everyday routine of home. Ethan had spent the entire car ride asking his mom questions. "Will Grandma make cookies? Can I stay up late with Grandpa? Do you think they'll let me watch cartoons in their room?" His mother smiled, glancing at him through the rearview mirror. "Ethan, you know Grandma and Grandpa love spoiling you. But remember, no jumping on their bed this time, okay?" He giggled, already imagining the fun he was going to have. When they arrived, his grandparents were waiting for him on the front porch. Grandma Ellen, with her silver-grey hair pulled into a soft bun, opened her arms wide. "There's my big boy," she exclaimed as Ethan jumped out of the car and ran to her. Grandpa Mike, a tall man with a booming laugh and a baseball cap he rarely took off, scooped Ethan up and spun him around before setting him back on the ground. "Ready for some fun, buddy?" Ethan nodded enthusiastically. The evening began just as Ethan had imagined it. Grandma Ellen baked a fresh batch of her famous chocolate chip cookies, letting Ethan help by sprinkling in the chocolate chips. He ended up eating more than he added, and Grandma didn't mind one bit. Grandpa Mike taught him a new card game, though Ethan made up his own rules halfway through, which Grandpa went along with, laughing as Ethan claimed victory every time. Later, after dinner, they all settled in the living room for a movie. Ethan was allowed to pick, so he chose one of his favorite Disney classics. He sat on the couch between his grandparents, a big bowl of buttery popcorn on his lap. Grandma Ellen's soft laugh filled the room during the funny parts, and Grandpa Mike would nudge Ethan every now and then, whispering little jokes that made him giggle uncontrollably. As the movie went on, Ethan noticed that Grandma Ellen seemed quieter than usual. She smiled at him when he looked up at her, but there was a tiredness in her eyes that he hadn't seen before. "Are you okay, Grandma?" he asked innocently. She reached out and smoothed his hair. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a little tired. Nothing a good night's sleep won't fix." Ethan accepted her answer, reassured by the gentle tone of her voice. Grandpa Mike chimed in. "Don't you worry about Grandma. She's tougher than she looks." When the movie ended, Grandma Ellen kissed Ethan on the forehead and said, "I think I'm going to head to bed early tonight, sweetheart. You boys behave yourselves, okay?" Ethan nodded, his mouth full of the last piece of popcorn. Grandpa Mike waved her off jokingly. "Don't worry, I've got this little troublemaker under control." She smiled at both of them before heading to her bedroom, leaving Ethan and his grandpa to finish the evening together. Grandpa Mike let Ethan stay up a little later than usual, which made Ethan feel like he was getting the VIP treatment. They played another game, read a short story, and then it was time for bed. Ethan insisted on sleeping in the guest room that night, which he called his vacation room, because it had colorful quilts and a little lamp shaped like a lighthouse. Grandpa Mike tucked him in, making sure his favorite stuffed animal, a worn but beloved lion named Leo, was snug under the blanket with him. "Good night, buddy," Grandpa Mike said, turning off the lamp. "Tomorrow morning we're going to the park and you can show me how fast you've gotten on the swings." Ethan beamed at the thought before drifting off to sleep. The next morning started quietly. Grandpa Mike had woken up early like he always did to start the day. He decided to run to the store for some essentials: milk, eggs, and a few things for breakfast. Ethan was still fast asleep when he left, and he figured he'd be back before the boy even realized he was gone. Grandma Ellen was still resting, so everything seemed perfectly normal. But as the sun crept higher in the sky, Ethan woke up. The house was quiet, but not in a scary way, just the stillness of an early morning in a safe, comfortable home. He stretched, grabbed Leo, and decided he would surprise his grandparents by drawing them a picture. He loved to draw, and his grandparents always told him he was a little artist in the making. He pulled out the box of crayons his grandma kept for him and got to work on a colorful scene of their family at the park. As he worked, he realized he hadn't seen either of his grandparents yet that morning. Curious and eager to share his masterpiece, Ethan wandered down the hallway to their bedroom. "Grandma? Grandpa?" he called out, his little voice echoing softly in the quiet house. When no one answered, he pushed open the bedroom door, excited to show his picture to his grandma. That's when he saw her lying on the bed, her face pale and her eyes closed. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure what was wrong, but something about the way she looked made his stomach twist with worry. "Grandma," he whispered, stepping closer. Her eyes opened slightly and her voice, barely audible, said, "Ethan, get help." For a moment, Ethan stood frozen. He didn't understand everything that was happening, but he knew his grandma needed help, right now. And then, like a flash, he remembered what his mum had taught him. If something bad happens and there's no grown-up around, call 911. With trembling hands, Ethan grabbed the phone from the living room. He pressed the buttons carefully, just like his mom had shown him, and waited. The sound of the line connecting seemed to stretch forever, but then a calm voice answered, 911, what's your emergency? Ethan's small voice shook as he said, My grandma's not waking up. She needs help. The dispatcher, hearing the fear and urgency in his voice, didn't hesitate for a second. Okay, sweetheart, don't worry. I'm sending help right now. Can you tell me your name? Ethan replied, Ethan. The dispatcher's voice remained steady, guiding him as he gave her his grandparents' address. Ethan followed her instructions, holding the phone tightly as he stayed near his grandma's bedside, whispering, It's okay, Grandma, they're coming. I called the helpers. Help was indeed on the way, but what Ethan didn't know was that this was only the beginning of a series of events that would change everything. Ethan sat beside his grandmother's bed, gripping her hand as tightly as his small fingers would allow. He kept glancing at her face, watching her chest rise and fall in slow, shallow breaths. Her eyes fluttered open occasionally, but she looked too weak to speak again. Ethan could feel the weight of her hand in his, and it made him feel scared in a way he had never experienced before. He was used to his grandmother being the strong, cheerful one, always full of warmth and laughter. Now she looked so fragile, and it made his heart ache in a way he didn't know how to describe. The phone was still pressed to his ear, and the dispatcher's calm voice guided him. She asked him simple questions to keep him talking, her tone soothing and steady. Ethan, you're doing such a great job. Can you tell me if your grandma's eyes are open? Ethan nodded, then remembered to speak. They're open a little, but she's not talking. That's okay, Ethan. You're very brave. Can you tell me if she's breathing? She is, but it's really slow, he said, glancing back at his grandmother. The dispatcher reassured him, That's very helpful. You're doing everything right. Help is coming very soon. Can you stay with your grandma and keep holding her hand? She'll feel better knowing you're there. Ethan nodded again, even though the dispatcher couldn't see him. He felt a small wave of comfort from her words, but the fear still churned in his stomach. He looked toward the window, hoping to see flashing lights or hear sirens in the distance, but everything outside was still quiet. Ethan, the dispatcher asked gently. "Do you know where your grandpa is?" "He went to the store to get milk," Ethan replied. "But I don't know when he'll be back." The dispatcher kept him talking, asking about his favorite colors, his favorite games, and what he liked to do with his grandparents. It was a distraction, and Ethan appreciated it, but he couldn't focus completely. His attention kept drifting back to his grandma, who hadn't moved much since he called for help. After what felt like an eternity, Ethan finally heard the sound he'd been waiting for. Sirens. His ears perked up, and he ran to the living room window, pressing his face to the glass. Red and blue lights flashed brightly as a police car pulled up to the curb, followed closely by an ambulance. Relief and nervous excitement washed over him. "They're here!" Ethan shouted into the phone, his voice cracking with a mixture of emotions. "That's great, Ethan," the dispatcher said warmly. "Can you open the door for them so they can come in?" Ethan dashed to the front door, dragging a chair from the kitchen to unlock the high deadbolt that was out of his reach. He swung the door open wide and stood in the frame, clutching his stuffed lion, Leo, in one hand. The first officer to step out of the car knelt down to Ethan's level, her face kind and reassuring. "Hi there, buddy. Are you Ethan?" she asked. Ethan nodded, his lip quivering slightly. "My grandma needs help. She's in the bedroom." "You did such a good job calling us, Ethan," she said, her voice full of warmth. She gestured to her partner and the paramedics, who quickly grabbed their equipment and followed Ethan inside. Ethan led them down the hallway, his small figure moving quickly toward the bedroom. The officers followed closely, their boots echoing softly on the hardwood floor. When they reached the room, the paramedics immediately went to work, checking Grandma Ellen's vital signs and administering oxygen. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching with wide eyes as they moved quickly and efficiently. "Will she be okay?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. One of the paramedics turned to him with a gentle smile. "You did the right thing calling us, Ethan. We're going to take good care of her, okay?" Ethan nodded, but the fear still lingered in his chest. He stayed rooted in the doorway, clutching Leo tightly. Meanwhile, the officers began their routine checks of the house, ensuring everything was secure and there were no other emergencies to address. As one officer moved through the living room and kitchen, she noticed something unusual. The back door was slightly ajar. A chill ran down her spine as she pushed it open and stepped outside, her eyes scanning the yard. "Hey, we've got something here," she called to her partner. The two officers inspected the area around the back door, noticing muddy footprints leading up to the entrance. The prints were fresh, and the way they were spaced suggested someone had been running. The officers exchanged a glance, their training kicking in. One officer spoke into her radio, requesting backup, while the other moved to check the perimeter of the house. The situation had taken an unexpected turn. What had initially seemed like a medical emergency was now something far more alarming. Back inside, Ethan stayed near the bedroom, unaware of what the officers had discovered. His focus remained on his grandma as the paramedics prepared to move her onto a stretcher. She opened her eyes briefly, her gaze landing on Ethan. "You're so brave," she murmured weakly, her words barely audible. Tears welled up in Ethan's eyes, but he didn't cry. He wanted to stay brave for her, just like the paramedics and officers said he was. As the paramedics wheeled Grandma Ellen out to the waiting ambulance, one of the officers gently placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Ethan, you've been such a big help today. Your grandma is going to the hospital so the doctors can take care of her. We'll stay here until your grandpa gets back, okay?" Ethan nodded, though the weight of everything that had happened felt heavy. He followed the paramedics to the door, watching as they loaded his grandma into the ambulance. The flashing lights reflected in his eyes, and for a moment, the world felt too big and too scary. The officer stayed beside him, kneeling down to his level. You're very brave, Ethan, and very smart. You saved your grandma's life today. Ethan looked up at her, clutching Leo tighter. I just didn't want her to be sick. The officer smiled, a warmth in her eyes that made Ethan feel a little better. You did more than that. You're a hero, buddy. But as the ambulance pulled away, the officers couldn't shake the unease about the muddy footprints. Someone had been there, and they were still trying to piece together why. As the ambulance pulled away with Grandma Ellen, the officers turned their attention to Ethan. He stood by the door, holding his stuffed lion, Leo, tightly against his chest. One of the officers crouched down to his level, her voice soft and reassuring. Ethan, your grandma is on her way to the hospital, and the doctors are going to take good care of her, she said gently. We're going to stay here until your grandpa comes back, okay? Ethan nodded, his big eyes filled with both worry and relief. But is she going to be okay? He asked, his voice trembling. The officer smiled warmly. She's a strong lady, Ethan, and thanks to you calling for help, she's got the best chance to get better. You did something really important today. Ethan's small shoulders relaxed a little, but the tension in the room wasn't completely gone. While one officer stayed with Ethan, the other continued investigating the back of the house. The muddy footprints leading to the slightly open back door gnawed at her instincts. Something about it didn't feel right. The officer grabbed her flashlight and stepped outside. The yard was quiet, bathed in the soft morning light. Birds chirped in the trees, and the faint hum of distant cars added to the suburban stillness. But the footprints told a different story. They weren't smudges from someone casually walking. They were deep, purposeful, like someone had been running. She followed the trail carefully, her eyes scanning the ground for clues. The footprints led to the side of the house, then abruptly stopped near a cluster of bushes. She crouched down, inspecting the area, and noticed a few broken twigs and disturbed dirt. Whoever had been here had been hiding. Gripping her radio, the officer called out to her partner, I've got something unusual on the west side of the house. Looks like someone was crouching in the bushes. Her partner's voice crackled back. Do you think they're still in the area? Hard to say, she replied, but this wasn't random. Inside, Ethan sat on the living room couch, the other officer keeping him company. She asked him about his favorite cartoons and toys, trying to distract him from the seriousness of the situation. Ethan, still clutching Leo, suddenly asked, Did someone else come to the house? I thought I heard noises last night, but I was too sleepy. The officer's ears perked up. Noises? What kind of noises, Ethan? He furrowed his brow, thinking. Like footsteps, and maybe the door opening. But I thought it was Grandpa, so I didn't get up. The officer exchanged a quick glance with her partner, who had just re-entered the house. The muddy footprints, the disturbed bushes, and now Ethan's comment painted a troubling picture. The officers decided to do a full sweep of the house to ensure it was safe. They started with the basement. The air grew cooler as they descended the creaky wooden stairs. The dim light bulb hanging from the ceiling flickered, casting long shadows across the room. At first glance, everything seemed normal. Boxes of old holiday decorations, a dusty workbench, and shelves lined with canned goods. But as one officer stepped further into the room, something caught her eye, a pile of blankets and a few empty food wrappers tucked behind a large storage bin. She motioned for her partner to come over. This looks like someone's been staying down here, she whispered. Her partner knelt down, inspecting the makeshift bedding. It was clear that whoever had been here wasn't just passing through. The food wrappers suggested they had been in the house for at least a day, maybe longer. The realization hit them hard. Someone had been living in the house without the family knowing. Upstairs, Ethan's grandpa, Mike, had just returned from the store. He was greeted by the sight of 2 police officers and his visibly shaken grandson. Dropping the grocery bags, he rushed to Ethan. "What's going on? Is Ellen okay?" The officer quickly explained the situation. Ellen had experienced a medical emergency and was en route to the hospital, thanks to Ethan's quick thinking. Mike's relief at hearing that Ellen was getting help quickly turned to concern as the officers shared what they had discovered. "Someone's been in your house," one officer said, her tone serious but measured. Mike's face paled. "What do you mean? Living here? While we were—" He cut himself off, his voice trembling. "While we were asleep?" The officers nodded. "We found evidence in the basement. Footprints outside. It looks like they've been here for at least a day or 2. Maybe longer." Mike's jaw tightened. He glanced at Ethan, who was sitting quietly on the couch, holding Leo. The thought of someone lurking in their home while his grandson and wife were there made his stomach churn. The officers decided to call for additional backup to search the surrounding area for the intruder. Meanwhile, they continued to question Mike, hoping to piece together how someone could have entered unnoticed. "Do you ever leave your doors unlocked?" one officer asked. Mike hesitated. "Not usually, but the back door sticks sometimes, so maybe it didn't latch all the way. Have you noticed anything unusual? Missing items? Strange noises?" Mike shook his head. "No, nothing. Everything seemed normal. I can't believe this." As they spoke, Ethan interrupted softly. "Grandpa, last night I thought I heard footsteps. But I thought it was you." Mike's face froze. "Footsteps?" Ethan nodded. "And the door, I thought you went outside." The weight of Ethan's words settled heavily on everyone in the room. Whoever had been in the house might have been moving around while they were all asleep. Outside, additional officers arrived to help search the area. They combed through the yard, nearby streets and alleys, but the intruder seemed to have vanished. The officers assured Mike and Ethan that they would continue investigating, but for now, their priority was ensuring the house was secure. Back inside, Ethan looked up at one of the officers, his voice small but steady. "Is Grandma going to be okay?" The officer knelt down beside him, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "She's going to be fine, Ethan. And it's all because of you. You were brave, and you did exactly what you needed to do." Ethan nodded, his grip on Leo loosening just a little. As the officers finished their sweep and prepared to leave, they left Mike with a stern reminder: secure the house, check every door and window, and don't hesitate to call if anything else seemed suspicious. Ethan, still processing everything that had happened, stayed close to his grandpa. But in his young mind, one thing was clear. He had done what his grandma needed him to do, and she was safe because of it. Little did he know, his courage had not only saved his grandma's life, it had also protected his family from a potentially far greater danger. As the officers wrapped up their investigation and the house was secured, Mike tried to refocus on what truly mattered. Ellen was safe and receiving medical care. The discovery of the intruder still weighed heavily on him, though. The thought of someone lurking in their home, eating their food, hiding in their basement, while his wife and grandson had been under the same roof, was too much to bear. He couldn't shake the idea that, had things gone just a little differently, the situation could have turned into something far worse. Ethan, meanwhile, was quieter than usual. He sat curled up on the couch with Leo, his big eyes glancing around the room as if he expected someone to appear out of nowhere. Mike could see the unease in his grandson's face, and it broke his heart. Ethan had been so brave, but the reality of what had happened was starting to sink in for him. "Hey, buddy," Mike said, sitting down beside Ethan. "How about we color a little? Or maybe build a tower with your blocks? We could even work on that puzzle you like." Ethan shook his head, clutching Leo tighter. What if they come back, Grandpa? Mike swallowed hard, doing his best to keep his own fears hidden. They're not coming back, Ethan. The police made sure of it. And I'm here now. I'll keep you safe. I promise. Ethan nodded slowly, but didn't let go of Leo. Mike decided that what Ethan needed most right now was comfort, not distraction. He wrapped his arm around his grandson and held him close. "You're the bravest little guy I know," he whispered. "Grandma's going to be okay because of you. You saved her, Ethan." Ethan looked up at him, his small face serious. "I just didn't want her to be sick." "And you made sure she got help," Mike said, his voice steady. "That's what heroes do. They take care of the people they love." At the hospital, Ellen was stabilized and undergoing tests to determine the extent of her condition. The doctors confirmed she had suffered a mild stroke, but emphasized that Ethan's quick action had made all the difference. If help had been delayed even by an hour, the outcome could have been far more severe. Ellen was still groggy when the doctor visited her room, but she managed a tired smile as she listened to his report. "Your grandson is a little hero," the doctor said warmly. "He may have saved your life." Tears filled Ellen's eyes as she thought about Ethan. "He's such a smart boy," she murmured, "and he has the kindest heart. I'm so proud of him." Ellen's recovery would take time, but the doctors were optimistic. She would need rest, therapy, and medication to manage her health moving forward, but she had a good chance at returning to her normal life, thanks to Ethan. Back at the house, Mike was on edge. Even though the officers had assured him the intruder was gone, he couldn't stop himself from double and triple checking every door and window. He went through every room in the house, examining every corner, every shadow, looking for any sign that someone might still be there. It wasn't until later that afternoon, when Ethan fell asleep on the couch with Leo tucked under his arm, that Mike allowed himself to sit down and breathe. He watched his grandson sleep, the peaceful rise and fall of his chest, a stark contrast to the chaos of the morning. Mike's mind raced with thoughts. What if Ethan hadn't been there? What if Ellen hadn't been found in time? What if the intruder had done something more? These thoughts terrified him, but they also made him realize how incredibly lucky they were. Ethan's quick thinking had saved not only Ellen's life, but possibly their own as well. As evening fell, Mike received a call from the hospital. Ellen was awake and wanted to speak to him. He gently woke Ethan, who rubbed his eyes and immediately asked, "Is Grandma okay?" "She's okay," Mike said, handing Ethan the phone. "She wants to talk to you." Ethan took the phone hesitantly, holding it to his ear. "Hi, Grandma." Ellen's voice, though weak, was full of love. "Hi, my sweet boy. I heard you called the helpers for me. You saved me, Ethan." Ethan's face lit up, but his voice was still small. "I didn't want you to be sick. I was scared." "Oh, honey, it's okay to be scared," Ellen said softly. "What you did was brave. I'm so proud of you. You're my little hero." "Are you coming home soon?" Ethan asked. "Not just yet," Ellen said gently. "I need to stay here for a little while so the doctors can help me get better. But I'm going to be just fine. And when I come home, we're going to make the biggest batch of cookies you've ever seen. How does that sound?" Ethan smiled for the first time all day. "Chocolate chip?" "Of course," Ellen replied, her voice full of warmth. That night, after Ethan had gone to bed, Mike sat alone in the living room. The house was quiet again, but this time the quiet didn't feel peaceful. It felt heavy, filled with the lingering unease of the day's events. He thought about the intruder, the footprints, the makeshift bedding in the basement, the food wrappers. Someone had been living in their home without their knowledge, watching them, moving through their space when they weren't looking. It was a chilling thought, one that Mike couldn't shake. But then his thoughts turned to Ethan. That little boy, just 4 years old, had shown a level of courage and quick thinking that most adults would struggle to muster. Mike couldn't stop marveling at the bravery it must have taken for Ethan to pick up the phone, dial 911, and calmly tell the dispatcher what was happening. In that moment, Mike realized that no matter how scary the situation had been, they had come through it together. Ethan had saved his grandma, and they were all going to be okay. The next day, as sunlight poured through the windows, Mike decided it was time to make sure Ethan knew just how much he was appreciated. He called him into the kitchen and lifted him onto the counter, where he could see the family photo they kept on the wall. "You see that picture, buddy?" Mike said, pointing to the photo of the three of them laughing together at the park. Ethan nodded. "That's when we fed the ducks." "That's right," Mike said. "And do you know why we're smiling in that picture? Because we're a team. No matter what happens, we stick together and we take care of each other. Yesterday, you proved how strong our team is." Ethan tilted his head, listening carefully. "You're our hero, Ethan," Mike said, ruffling his hair. "Grandma's going to be okay because of you, and I promise nothing bad's going to happen to us because we've got each other." Ethan smiled, a small but genuine smile that lit up his whole face. "Can we go feed the ducks again when Grandma's better?" "Absolutely," Mike said. "And this time, we'll bring extra bread." The house wasn't just a place anymore. It was a reminder of their bond, their resilience, and their ability to face even the scariest moments together. And for Ethan, it was a lesson that bravery wasn't about being fearless. It was about doing the right thing, even when you're scared. The days turned into weeks, and Grandma Ellen's recovery progressed steadily. The doctors were amazed at how quickly she regained her strength, crediting the swift action of her grandson for giving her the best chance to heal. Each time Ethan visited her in the hospital, she would light up with a smile, no matter how tired she felt. "You're the reason I'm sitting here today, Ethan," she told him one afternoon. "You're my hero." Ethan would always blush at the praise, shrugging shyly and saying, "I just didn't want you to be sick, Grandma." But his actions spoke louder than his words. Every visit he brought her colorful drawings of them playing at the park, baking cookies, or sitting under the big oak tree in her yard. The pictures became a symbol of hope and healing, a reminder of the bond that had carried them through a dark time. When Ellen finally returned home, the entire family gathered to welcome her. Balloons and handmade banners filled the living room, and the smell of fresh cookies baked by Mike and Ethan wafted through the air. Ethan ran to her as soon as she walked through the door, wrapping his little arms around her waist. "I missed you, Grandma," he said, his voice muffled against her sweater. "I missed you too, sweetheart," Ellen replied, her voice full of emotion. That night, as they all sat around the dinner table, laughing and sharing stories, the fear and uncertainty of the past weeks seemed to melt away. The house, once shadowed by worry, was now filled with love and gratitude. Later, when Ethan was tucked into bed, Grandma Ellen sat on the edge of his mattress, stroking his hair. "You taught us something very important, Ethan," she said softly. "You showed us that even when things are scary, we can find courage in our hearts. And because of you, we're all here together." Ethan smiled, his eyes heavy with sleep, but his heart full of warmth. "I just love you, Grandma," he whispered. "I love you too, my little hero," she said, leaning down to kiss his forehead. As time passed, the family made sure to reinforce the lessons they had learned. Mike installed new locks and security cameras around the house, determined to never let a stranger slip into their home unnoticed again. Ellen took her health more seriously, following her doctor's advice to the letter. And Ethan, though young, became a symbol of bravery and quick thinking in their small neighborhood. Word of his actions spread, and neighbors often stopped by to tell him how proud they were. One even brought him a small badge that read, "Neighborhood Hero," which Ethan wore proudly. But more than the recognition, the family carried something deeper, an understanding of the importance of being prepared and staying calm under pressure. Mike made sure Ethan knew how to call 911, recite his address, and explain emergencies clearly, skills that many adults even struggle with. For Ellen, her grandson's act wasn't just an act of love, it was a wake-up call. She used her experience to encourage other families to teach their children how to handle emergencies. "You never know when they'll need it," she said. "Ethan saved my life because he was prepared." This story reminds us that even the smallest among us can make the biggest difference. Ethan's quick thinking and calm response didn't just save his grandmother. They inspired a community to be more prepared, to look out for each other, and to appreciate the strength we can find in those we least expect. What about you? Do you think you're prepared for an emergency? Have you taught your children or younger siblings how to call 911 and share their address? Let us know in the comments below. Your advice could help someone else be ready when it matters most. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any of our upcoming stories. Share this video with your friends and family. It might just save a life. Thank you for watching, and always remember, even in the darkest moments, the smallest actions can bring the brightest hope. See you in the next story.